We'll take a look at some more of the events and the responses surrounding the Uvalde school shooting and the annual NRA Convention held also in Texas just 3 days later. First, let's take a look at what Texas Representative Dan Crenshaw had to say to CNN when pressed about his thoughts regarding the ease of access of guns that ultimately led to this tragedy. Let's take a look.
A lot of these policies that I think the Democrats often propose that are gun control policies, they do two things. One, they infringe on the rights of millions and millions of gun owners. And two, they probably wouldn't have the outcome that you're hoping for. So if you're not going to get the benefit that you want, but it's going to come at great cost, that generally means it's not a very good policy. Again, that's why I go back to hardening schools, because it should be fairly easy to afford. Well, we can look at data. We could have this discussion for a while, but the correlation between gun ownership and gun violence is not very strong. It's not as strong as a lot of people tend to believe it is. You have states like New Hampshire and Midwestern states that have extremely lax gun control.
Congressman, it sounds like you're saying that guns in this country are not a problem. Is that what you're saying? I mean, there are 300-something million people, 400 million guns. You don't see that as a problem?
No, I mean, I think culturally we're a country that has long had a Second Amendment that believes in the right to self-defense. I mean, I don't think it's a problem that I own guns. And I know that if I destroyed all my guns, it would have zero effect on crime. It would have zero effect on gun homicides, because I'm not the person who goes and shoots somebody. I am a person who might protect somebody from being shot. The other thing that gets left out of this, and this is a CDC study. CDC found that there's hundreds of thousands of cases a year where somebody used a gun to protect themselves or protect others. It happened just this week in West Virginia.
There were 19 people. Right. There were 19 people who were highly trained in the hallway, and they couldn't save these
and that's
children.
A problem right there.
The Second Amendment. It is a problem, and everybody agrees on that, no question. The Second Amendment calls for a well-regulated militia. Do you really think the Founding Fathers, when they wrote well-regulated militia, intended for enough guns, weapons of war that you are so highly trained in using should be used to massacre children?
Well, there's more to the Second Amendment than what you just read, right? And there's a comma after that. So there's two different ideas in the Second Amendment. There's the individual right to own a gun, and there's the right of the people to have a well-regulated militia. But let's talk about the weapons of war thing for a second, because you brought that up. So having been to war and having used many, many weapons of war, I don't really classify these rifles as weapons of war. We use them, but they're more our self-defense weapon. And I would say that if a SEAL team or an infantry unit goes on offense, they're using much, much bigger weapons that are not available to your common civilian. We use our M4s, which is an AR-style weapon, mostly for self-defense and for very close quarters type of combat. And by the way, they have capabilities that your civilian rifles do not. These are still semi-automatic rifles. In the military, we have automatic weapons. I would also say we never use them on full auto because they're extremely inaccurate that way, so they're not really useful in that sense. But in any case, these are not the same.
So raising the age of gun ownership to not 18 years old would have a direct effect on this particular situation. But we'll discuss some ideas that have been floating around a little bit later in the broadcast. So Dan Crenshaw openly admitting that more guns and easier access to guns is not a problem in this country. Of course, we already covered very much in depth how the good guy with a gun theory and how it utterly failed. Now, lastly, the discussion about the Second Amendment and weapons of war, let's get into that. I mean, look, he knows better. He knows better, but he's hoping that you don't. When the Second Amendment was written, the state of Prussia was considered the most militarized and efficient army the world had ever seen. Trained Prussian soldier could fire off 3 musket balls per minute, and that's really saying something. Prussia was referenced as, and we covered this before, not a state with an army, but an army in control of a state, because of the militarization of its culture. they were direct descendants of the Teutonic Knights. Their country was literally founded by crusaders. Prussia obliterated the French army in the Franco-Prussian War using what we consider now hunting rifles. Same can be said for both the Allies and the Entente during World War I. So for Dan Crenshaw himself, a veteran, to say that a bolt-action rifle, let alone an AR, is just not a weapon of war, it's outright BS. Oh, I didn't say it. It's outright BS to say that it's not a weapon of war. Just ask the British Army during the First Boer War in South Africa. Dutch Afrikaners did pretty well holding off the entire British Army using revolvers and bolt-action rifles. Practically dressed like, Billy the Kid out there, right? I mean, he knows better. But he's hoping that you don't. So Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger brings a surprising and relieving voice of reason to the discussion. Kinzinger, one of the few Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump for his attempt to overthrow the United States on January 6th. Let's take a listen.
You now support universal background checks, red flag laws, raising the minimum age to buy a gun, banning high-capacity magazines. How did your thinking evolve?
So a lot of that happened around Vegas. So I woke up the morning after the Vegas shooting, and we heard the audio from that, and I had shot a bump stock before. I knew that was a bump stock, and so I called for banning bump stocks. And at that point, it's like, okay, this is getting out of hand. What are the things we can do, to make a difference? I mean, obviously there's going to be some fundamental disagreement, and it's like, what? Well, why should somebody be able to buy a gun at 18, particularly a long gun at 18, when, as of recently, they can't even smoke cigarettes till they're 21? It's just the right thing to do. The problem is everybody is scared to inaction. They're frightened of the loudest voices, and 90% of Americans are begging that we do something.
Is that the reason why you think so many of your fellow Republicans aren't where you are on those issues?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a bunch that are where I am, but they won't say it, or they won't come out and say it because, again, it's, I've experienced this, whether it's talking about Donald Trump, January 6th, or the guns issue, is, once you make something that's outside of the cultist position or outside of, that, like, tribal position, you're going to get a bunch of texts that say you're crazy, it's my right, the Second Amendment. Even though we all believe in the Second Amendment, we just believe that there are reasonable things to do about it. And, look, if you look at this shooting, you look at Buffalo, you look at Parkland, and all these others, they are people taking these guns, these ARs, under the age of 21. Can we stop all of it? No. Can we mitigate it? Certainly. And we should be doing that now.
Surprising voice of reason, but, too little too late, unfortunately, as Representative Kinzinger will not seek re-election this year. Let's hope that he isn't replaced with a Marjorie Taylor Greene clone or worse. So CNN's Jim Acosta got all up in it. We'll say an opportunity to speak with Judge Philip Journey, a board member of the NRA, to get his insight, we'll call it, on the NRA's convention in Texas, again, just 3 days after the shooting in Uvalde. Listen to when Jim Acosta mentions Donald Trump's dancing, to which the judge suggests, oh, he didn't do that. That's ridiculous. Then, of course, they play the video. This is just really disturbing stuff.
Push for the most relaxed rules possible on firearms. Isn't some of this blood on the NRA's hands?
Well,
let me first say, Jim, thanks for having me on the show. I want to tell you that I really don't believe the supposition of your question is accurate. I know that while I'm not a spokesperson for anybody, I followed the issue closely, and that the NRA and other organizations, even myself as a state senator in Kansas, have worked to tighten the laws. I think that it's important to understand that
No, sir.
these laws actually...
I hope you understand. I'm going to have to cut you off when you start saying things that just aren't true. The NRA has not worked to tighten rules. That's just not the case. The NRA for years, for decades, has pushed for the most relaxed rules possible in this country, and that's why we have mass shooting after mass shooting after. Please, if you could answer the question that I asked you at the beginning of the interview, isn't this blood on your hands?
I'm not the one that pulled the trigger, and neither are the members of the National Rifle Association. I think Buffalo is a great example where the alarms were going off in New York, and all the officials did was hit the snooze button. He could have easily been processed through a care and treatment action. He was a danger to himself or others. He'd already threatened mass shooting prior, and nobody did anything. Well,
if he's a troubled young man, if he's a troubled young man, should he be able to go out and buy an AR-15 assault rifle or style assault rifle, which is what happened in Buffalo, which is what happened in Uvalde. Your group is holding its convention in Houston, where you are right now, just a few days after the massacre in Uvalde. We saw Donald Trump dancing on stage at the end of his remarks.
He was not. I was there. He was not dancing.
How is any of this at all appropriate? We're showing it on stage right now. He's doing a little jig there. People are waving their NRA hats and so on. It's this celebratory atmosphere right after a mass shooting where all of these kids are gunned down. How is that appropriate?
I think that what you're doing is just telling part of the story there, because at the beginning of his speech, he did do a
Telling part of the story. He didn't do that. That's crazy. Next, we'll take a look at what the recount put together. This is great. It's like a night and day of Texas Governor Greg Abbott's. It is literally like night and day. It's his message to the NRA, put side by side. His message to the NRA, pre-recorded the convention at around 4 p.m. And then speaking with the families of the victims of the Uvalde shooting, nearly 30 minutes later. I couldn't make it up if I wanted to. Let's take a look at this.
We will be looking for the best laws that we can get passed to make our communities and schools safer.
There are thousands of laws on the books across the country that limit the owning or using of firearms. Laws that have not stopped madmen from carrying out evil acts on innocent people in peaceful communities.
I mean, night and day. What a complete sack of garbage. Governor Greg Abbott from Texas, all but literally spitting in the faces of the families of those 19 dead children. Wow. And Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, of course, he couldn't live with himself if he had missed the spotlight. And echoing Lauren Boebert's claim about Cox and Pitts, let's take a listen.
If you simply did something on school safety, that makes a huge difference. Think about after 9/11, and we had, a safety issue with our airlines. We invested in it. We put air marshals there. We put armed guards there. We armed the cockpits as well, and it made a difference for safety, and people had confidence in it. We didn't restrict anything. Well, we did, but we put our magnetometers in place. So we relied upon that, and we could do the same thing with our schools. It's not easy, but that's really the most important focus that we can have.
Yeah, let's make the schools more like, the TSA. Are you kidding me right now? Keep in mind, this is the same guy who signed an abortion ban, not including for incest or rape, and then went on national TV and said, well, we could take care of all that later. Maybe after it's too late, he'll rescind his statements here once child soldiers are a reality in Arkansas, he'll come out and be like, oh boy, gosh, we, maybe gone too far and we'll have to do something about this, and never do anything about it. Just a garbage person. He should go bowling with Greg Abbott, maybe. The former Uvalde police can, spray clean his shoes, whenever they're finished, right? Also, just ask Madison Cawthorn about guns on planes after 9/11. If H. Hutchinson seems so confused about that. I mean, if he's so confident about cockpits, why again wasn't Donald Trump carrying at the NRA convention? Who knows? Pete Ricketts, Republican governor of Nebraska. This guy has rocks for brains and ooze just dripping out of his ears, and of course vomit coming out of his mouth.
That's the whole thing. People talk about assault rifles, but they can't really tell me what that is. What does an assault rifle mean? How do you define it? That's a gun that's sold to the military. Okay, so so what does that mean, Paul? Because you can sell any gun to the military. You can sell handguns. The military buys handguns. Does that mean they're assault rifles now? Okay, so Paul, again, that's the whole point. You throw up all these red herrings about how to restrict people's gun rights, but we actually have to focus on what is the root cause, and that gets back to the person who's disturbed and does terrible things, like what we saw down in Texas. We got to focus on how do we have better interventions? How do we get to those people who need that help? That's where we really need to put our focus.
What is his party doing again? Someone remind me, to expand healthcare across the country. And maybe people like Pete Ricketts forgot that mental health can easily be covered by Medicare expansion. That thing that his party hates so much. I mean, this argument coming from these people about mental health is just beyond discussion. Seriously though, I want to know who guessed that we would end this segment with Teen Wolf Cruise. I want to know in the comments. Let me know what you think.
Taking away every firearm that Michael Knowles owns would not have stopped this psychopath from murdering children in Uvalde. And by the way, we see that in Chicago and New York and D.C. and California, where they have very strict gun control. Yeah. And the criminals still have guns and still carry out murders. If you could wave a magic wand and eliminate all firearms in America, there would be substantially more murders than there are today.
And nobody wants to take away Michael Knowles' guns. We just want to recommend an orthodontist. All right, now we have gone over this extensively on this program, so I'm going to make it real quick and easy. The problem with gun violence in Chicago is South Bend, Indiana, and Indiana's gun laws. The problem with gun violence in D.C. is the entire state of Virginia and its gun laws. The problem with gun violence in California, Nevada, Arizona, Ted Cruz, idiot. I mean, if you could just wave a magic wand and make people like Mr. Potato Ted understand that, you know what? Actually, he's an educated man. He knows better. It's just like all the other talking points coming from these people when it comes to culture. It's about money. He's on the NRA's payroll. Best not to act like he isn't. I mean, he knows better. Just like Tucker Carlson knows better. Just like I know better than to brag on the left every chance I get myself, right? I mean, we're all in it for that sweet, sweet dollars. Oh, except I do brag on the left. And I'm not actually being paid to do this, which brings me to my next point. You can support independent media for as little as $3 per month simply by going to patreon.com/chainsawccc and joining as a patron. Help Chainsaw keep all these lights on. Otherwise, we'll have to cut the show back to like one day a week, and I'll have to go back to shining shoes with the Uvalde police officers. Boy, won't that make for an uncomfortable first union meeting. But anyway, I showed this last week, but I think it's worth, honestly, another look. Part of which because there's a response to it. So let's check it out.
There are 19 sets of parents who who are never going to get to kiss their child goodnight again.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
The proposals from Democrats in the media, inevitably, when some violent psychopath murders people.
A violent psychopath who's able to get a weapon so easily. 18-year-old with 2 AR-15s.
If you want to stop violent crime, the proposals the Democrats have, none of them would have stopped this.
But why does this only happen in your country? I really think that's what many people around the world just, they cannot fathom. Why only in America? Why is this American exceptionalism so awful?
You know, I'm sorry you think American exceptionalism is awful.
I think this aspect
you know what?
of it.
You got your political agenda.
No, it's honestly,
God love you.
Senator, it's not. I just want to understand.
So look, if you watched last week, we covered this, and I mean, one thing that I don't think that I mentioned before is it's just amazing to me how smoothly Ted Cruz made that transition. How high up on the totem pole is your psychotic nationalism that the mere suggestion offhandedly in a sentence, just because the words were used about American exceptionalism being awful. He didn't say American exceptionalism is a trash argument. There's no such thing as American exceptionalism, or just in Ted Cruz's mind just went way off the rails and way I find that super strange and super smooth, because then he can play it off later like, oh well, that was just some foreigner who was talking trash about the United States, and we are an exceptional country, and we are the beacon of freedom and hope, you know. And then his response, of course, that people from all over the world come here, and nothing to do with the question at hand, just another talking point by ultra MAGA, super nationalist, amosexual Ted Cruz. And so he has a response on apparently the same goofy podcast with Mighty Incisor Knowles here. Let's take a look.
I didn't want to argue with this guy, and I'm disengaging. He's a British guy who was an obnoxious leftist, and he's like, why does this only happen in America? Doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. It's only America. Why is American exceptionalism so horrible? Oh. The premise of his question is factually false. And I actually, Newsweek just published something which
wait for it.
Which I'll point out. I'm quoting from Newsweek that says since 1988 there have been a total of 9 attacks similar to the Robb Elementary School shooting. 9 is 9 too many. But once you adjust for population, there are many other countries, from Germany to Russia to Finland, that have comparable rates of school shooting. I didn't want to argue.
Once you adjust for population? Did Republican Ted Cruz just say that? Adjust for population? Isn't that the same argument the Republicans refuse to consider when discussing health care or really any social safety nets whatsoever? You know, because we aren't Denmark or Norway or Iceland or Finland or Sweden or Faroe or and these assholes want to talk about mental health as the problem with shootings. I mean, they've literally shown for decades now that they refuse to do anything about anything regarding health care or mental health. States like Missouri, our very own lovable Governor Magoo, campaigned against Medicaid expansion, referred to it as something that Missourians simply cannot afford. But now Tenderoni Cruz wants to talk about health care, how we need to take care of each other. You gotta be kidding me. It's just too much. It's just too much. I can't take it. My exceptional American chest is beating out of my We also have a problem with education in this country.